Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton's.
Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton's in. For decades, she built an empire from talent, determination, and generosity, creating a fortune that stretched far beyond records, concerts, and business ventures. Dolly Parton spent her final days saying goodbye to the people closest to her. But one goodbye was different. It went to Billy Ray Cyrus, a friend of over 30 years, and it carried a secret neither of them had known for most of that time. Then, shortly before Dolly died, she sent Billy Ray one final message. But the story everyone's telling about that message is only half of it. What did she tell him? And why did he matter enough to hear it first? Join us as we uncover the final heartbreaking message.
I believe that I'm as phony as I look, because I run true and deep.
Dolly Parton sent Billy Ray Cyrus before her death. A tour bus, a newborn, and a promise with no paper. In the spring of 1992, Achy Breaky Heart was playing on every country station in America, and the man who sang it had no idea what to do with any of it. Billy Ray Cyrus was 30 years old, freshly signed, new to fame, and completely unprepared for arenas full of strangers who already knew every word to a song that had turned him into a star practically overnight. So, somebody handed him the safest job in country music that year: open for Dolly Parton. Dolly had been a headliner since before Billy Ray owned a guitar. She'd already survived a bitter, headline-grabbing split from her mentor, Porter Wagoner, who sued her for millions when she finally struck out on her own. She survived Hollywood and turned a rhinestone and wig persona into a fortune. And by 1992, she'd earned the right to treat a green Kentucky singer with either indifference or amusement. She chose neither. Backstage, in the strange downtime between soundcheck and showtime that exists on every tour but never makes it into the footage, she talked to him like he already belonged there. Headliners weren't required to remember an opener's name by the time the tour reached the next city, let alone the names of their kids. Dolly did, every time. The friendship grew in the ordinary spaces between the shows, hallway conversations, shared cigarettes outside tour buses, and the simple relief of finding someone who understood what it felt like to be homesick. Tennessee and Kentucky border each other, and on a tour that stretched through dozens of cities where nobody knew their names before the tickets sold out, that border started to feel like family. By the time the tour ended, Billy Ray and his girlfriend, Tish, were expecting their first child together, due that November. He didn't call a lawyer or draw up paperwork. He walked up to Dolly, a woman he'd known for months, and asked her to be the baby's godmother. On nothing but the strength of a summer on the road together. Dolly said yes before he finished the sentence. Miley Cyrus was born on November 23, 1992, and Dolly kept the promise for the rest of her life. She'd tell people she'd known Miley since before Miley existed, which was true down to the calendar. When Miley became a Disney Channel phenomenon a decade later, Dolly showed up on set and became Aunt Dolly on national television, an inside joke that happened to be filmed for millions of people. She stood next to Miley at award shows in her 70s, still introducing her the same way, still meaning it exactly as much as she had in 1992. Nobody at the time noticed that the friendship never needed the goddaughter title to survive. Miley grew up, became a pop star, burned down a Disney image, and rebuilt a new one. And through all of it, Billy Ray and Dolly kept touring together, recording together, staying tethered to each other long after the tour bus that started it all had been sold or scrapped. They had no idea, not even a little, how literally true the word family already was. The ancestry report nobody went looking for. For over 3 decades, Both of them used the same word to describe what they had. Family. Not by blood, they always clarified, just family in every way that counted. Dolly called Miley one of her own. Billy Ray called Dolly practically an aunt to his kids. It was repeated so often that eventually it stopped sounding like a claim at all. Then, in September 2024, a team of genealogists at Ancestry.com ran a routine deep dive into celebrity family trees, the sort of thing a PR team schedules for a slow news day, not a discovery. What they found wasn't routine at all. Dolly Parton and Miley Cyrus were cousins, seventh cousins once removed, connected through a man named John Brickey, born in Virginia in 1740, who eventually put down roots in what's now Blount County, Tennessee, a stretch of land close enough to where Dollywood sits today that Dolly could practically see her own family history from her theme park. Brickey lived out the rest of his life on that same stretch of land with his wife and children, farming a stretch of Tennessee soil he had no way of knowing would one day sit in the shadow of a theme park built by his own descendant. He died there in 1806, nearly 2 centuries before either Dolly or Miley was born, with no possible way of knowing that 2 of his bloodlines would end up standing on the same stage together, or that one of them would spend 6 decades becoming one of the most famous women on Earth. Brickey was Miley's 7th great-grandfather. He was Dolly's 6th. 2 branches of the same tree had split off nearly 3 centuries earlier and grown in completely different directions. One ending in a mountain girl who'd become the queen of country music, the other in a Disney star, and neither line had any idea the other existed until a database revealed it. Dolly's reaction was delight. She told Access Hollywood the news floored her. She'd always felt that close to Miley, close enough that she'd half expected them to turn out to be cousins several times over. She'd spent years joking that she and Miley were close enough to be blood. It turned out she'd been right the entire time and simply hadn't had the paperwork to prove it. Billy Ray didn't ask Dolly to be his daughter's godmother because a DNA test told him to. He asked because she was a woman he trusted, built on nothing but a handful of months sharing a stage. The blood tie showed up 32 years later, discovered by strangers running a genealogy database long after the relationship it was quietly hiding inside had already been built entirely on choice. Billy Ray had spent 3 decades believing he'd picked a friend to fold into his family. What the science eventually confirmed was that he'd recognized family before he had any language for it, standing on a tour bus decades before anyone would ever hand him a chart proving it. Neither of them ever said it that plainly out loud, but it's difficult to look at the timeline and not wonder whether their connection ran deeper than a shared love of Tennessee twang. Billy Ray would later return to one early moment between them again and again, and it says a lot about why the friendship lasted. The wink that outlived a scandal. In 1992, tabloids didn't need much to run a story, and a rising male star touring with a female legend was more than enough. A rumor started making the rounds that Billy Ray and Dolly were sleeping together. It wasn't true, and it didn't need to be, because the version that sold magazines was more interesting than the boring reality that they were just friends. Billy Ray was young enough to still believe tabloids owed him an apology, not the other way around, but he felt sick about it anyway. He walked into Dolly's dressing room, ready to grovel for something he hadn't done, bracing for an awkward conversation about words that had been put in both their mouths. Dolly didn't let him finish. She looked at him, gave him a wink, and told him not to sweat it, because garbage like that was exactly what sold records. She waved it off entirely. She'd been famous long enough to know the tabloids were going to print whatever moved units, regardless of what either of them said. And somewhere along the way, she'd decided the only sane move was to laugh at the nonsense instead of letting it eat a hole in her. She told him that garbage like that was exactly what sold records. It's barely a scene. A few seconds in a cramped dressing room backstage at some arena that's probably been demolished by now. But it told Billy Ray everything he needed to know about who Dolly would be to him. She could take a moment that might have humiliated both of them and turn it into a private joke in under 10 seconds. For a 30-year-old who had just become famous, that was enough to make the whole thing feel a little less terrifying. It was one of the first things he brought up when he finally spoke about her. Before the awards, hit songs, or anything that would fit neatly on a highlight reel. Not because it was significant to anyone but him, but because it captured exactly what kind of friend she'd been from day one. Unbothered, quick, and somehow always making his problems feel smaller than he thought they were. That steadiness would matter later. 2 years before Dolly sent him her final message, Billy Ray was lying in a hospital bed, with doctors telling him to get his affairs in order. 2 different clocks, both running out. In 2024, Billy Ray was fighting sepsis, and it was winning. His body turned on itself, joints and hands and face swelling until he barely recognized himself in a mirror. He was in and out of the hospital with no clear answers. At one point close enough to it that doctors raised the subject of getting his affairs in order. The floor made it worse. Billy Ray ended up on the exact same wing of the same hospital where his mother, Ruth Ann, had died 2 years earlier. He'd walked those hallways once already, as a son standing at a bedside, and now he was the one in the bed, listening to doctors use the language reserved for people who are running out of time. He later called it one of the most broken stretches of his life. He survived, and he called it nothing short of a miracle. But survival came with a bill. In the aftermath, his vocal cords froze, a temporary paralysis that stole the one tool that had defined his entire identity since the first time a radio station played "Achy Breaky Heart." For a man who'd built his whole life around his voice, losing it, even for a while, was its own private grief. His 5-year-old grandson, Bear, became the reason he kept trying. During one of his lowest nights, Bear told him to try again. Billy Ray took it as a sign and started learning to sing from nothing, one broken note at a time. While Billy Ray was clawing his way back, competing on The Masked Singer in a feathered owl costume by February 2026, releasing his first new album in over a decade that June, Dolly's own clock had already started running down before Billy Ray's ever slowed. In November 2024, her oldest brother, David Wilburn Parton, died at 82, a retired bridge builder who'd lived his whole life happily invisible next to his famous sister. 4 months later, on March 3, 2025, Carl Dean, her husband of nearly 60 years, died in Nashville at 82. They'd met outside a laundromat when Dolly was 18 and married quietly in 1966. For 6 decades, he'd stayed almost entirely out of the spotlight by choice. Losing him meant losing the one person who'd outlasted every album and every version of fame she'd ever worn. Afterward, Dolly said no words could really do justice to a love that had lasted more than 60 years. That August, Jeannie Seely, a Grand Ole Opry mainstay Dolly had called one of her dearest friends since her earliest days in Nashville, died at 85. Billy Ray, who'd crossed paths with Jeannie through his own career, sent his own tribute for the same woman they were both grieving. Then, in July 2026, just weeks before Dolly's own death, her brother, Coy, known to the family as Denver, died at 82. He'd spent his working life as a crane operator, building bridges across the same valleys he'd grown up in, then filled his retirement with hunting and small farming. Another Parton, like David before him, who never once tried to borrow his sister's spotlight. The last thing she needed him to know. Sometime in her final days, Dolly picked up her phone. Everything that had built toward this moment was already sitting in place. Billy Ray was a man who'd nearly died 2 years earlier and had heard doctors use the language of goodbyes firsthand. Dolly was a woman who had spent 20 months burying her husband, 2 brothers, and one of her dearest friends, all while publicly insisting she still had more music left in her. And neither of them had any idea, until a genealogy database told them otherwise, that the friendship carrying them through all of it was also, quietly, a blood tie stretching back 300 years. Dolly sent Billy Ray a message. It was personal, the one thing she apparently needed him to know while she still had the chance. That she loved him with her whole heart. No conditions attached. Billy Ray didn't share it while she was alive. He revealed it only after her death, folding it into his own tribute once the news broke, and he said her words had stayed with him, that whatever she felt for him, he felt back in exactly the same measure, and always would. Dolly had countless people who loved her by the end, collaborators, mentees, and lifelong friends scattered across 5 decades of Nashville. But Billy Ray was the man who'd chosen her to be family to his daughter, before either of them had proof they actually were family. He was the friend who'd carried her wink through 30 years of a business built on humiliation. And he was, by the time her message reached him, one of the only people in her life who understood exactly how close a goodbye can come to never being said at all, because he'd already lived through his own version of almost running out of time. Dolly was saying goodbye to someone who'd become family twice, once by choice in 1992, and once by blood, 3 centuries in the making. At the exact moment her own life had spent 18 months teaching her that nothing about the people you love comes with a guarantee. Cotton, not rhinestones. Her final months were spent in and out of Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. Dolly Parton died on August 25, 2026, at 80 years old, after a brief battle with cancer layered on top of health issues she'd been open about since Carl's death. The date landed on Billy Ray's 65th birthday, a coincidence neither of them would have wanted, and neither of them got to choose. She didn't want the news delivered by a press release. Years earlier, she'd personally asked her nephew, Brian Seaver, to be the one to tell the world when the time came, a request he'd absorbed as a hypothetical long before he ever had to treat it as real. He called it an honor that is mixed with absolute pride and great sadness. Brian had served as her head of security for over 2 decades, a role his own father had held before him. And in the video he posted, he described her as having lived in the light, now reunited with Carl, her parents, and everyone who'd gone before her. Brian passed along one more request. Dolly wanted to be buried in a bed of plush cotton, explaining that after a lifetime spent wrapped in rhinestones and wigs and sequined costumes, she'd finally earned something soft. She'll be laid to rest in her signature heels, this time with a plain cotton dress instead of sequins. A quiet contradiction that says more about who she actually was than any of the costumes ever did. A farmer's daughter from the Smoky Mountains, who happened to spend 60 years being one of the most photographed women on Earth. She'll rest at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville beside Carl, closing a distance that opened the day he died a year and a half earlier. There was no large public funeral. Her family kept the service small and private, protecting the same privacy that had defined her marriage for 6 decades, even while the rest of her life played out for the entire world to watch. Tributes poured in fast, from Reba McEntire to Sir Paul McCartney to Jane Fonda. Miley posted her own goodbye within minutes of the news, calling Dolly the purest soul and writing that her heart ached. the goddaughter whose birth had started all of this, saying goodbye to the woman who'd never once let the title be just a formality. In a follow-up post, she added that Dolly had transcended time itself, and that she'd go on living in the hearts of generations who'd never even had the chance to meet her. Her final requests were for softness and quiet, and the chance to lie next to the one man who'd loved her privately for 60 years. In one last message, Billy Ray had just learned he'd been loved that same way too. Does knowing they shared blood the whole time change what the friendship was? Or does it just prove some people find each other no matter what the family tree says? And if Billy Ray hadn't already survived his own near-death scare 2 years earlier, do you think that message would have landed the same way? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.